Ghosts have somehow moved into my day.
Hello everyone, Pamela Zero here. Welcome to Duck Duck Goose, a podcast about the Visitor series. This episode includes chapters 17 and 18 of the book Ose. Thanks for coming along on Ose's journey. Chapter 17, Fran, Lucent's Sanctuary, Punjar. Fran phased up to level 9. She was up and over the wall in a moment, landing softly on the other side. A patrol of 2 beings carrying phase rifles trudged by her. They were short and stocky, with tusks that curved upwards on both sides of their mouths. Kira. She remembered hiring them herself back when the visitors were trying to find a way to leave the temple. She held still, relying on the invisibility of her phase level to keep her unnoticed. Once the Kira were out of sight, she moved quickly, reconnoitering the open areas and walkways, and mentally noting numbers, as well as any areas that lacked coverage by the intruders. The air smelled of flowers, with a stringent note of something bitter. Pulse rifle fire. Steeling herself for bodies, she kept moving. Fran remembered this feeling of being invisible and safe in phase while danger walked an arm's length away. This is what it had been like at Burston after everyone else had left, and she was there, alone with the Thriddians, destroying their machines and picking them off, one by one. Her cheeks ached. She realized she was grinning and wiped the smile off her face. She went into every structure she passed, but saw only minimal patrols by the tusked guards. Following a burly trio, she came to a large building that had a good-sized group of intruders in front of it. A quick look through the front windows showed a lobby area full of stocky guards. They were heavily armed. Fran moved to the back of the building and tested a door on the rear wall. It opened silently, and she slipped in. She was at the back of a theater with a massive stage and a heavy curtain. She moved silently to the right front edge of the stage and put her eye to the gap between the curtain and the wall. A large group of Lucents huddled in the middle of the room, perched on the audience seats. 3 more Lucents were lying in one of the aisles. They appeared to be dead. Fran couldn't spot Sai. Surrounding them were at least 20 of the intruders. Fran smiled grimly and headed back the way she had come. Climbing back over the outside wall, she hesitated for a moment. She could take them out before they even realized she was there. She kept climbing. David and Ose were still standing where she had left them. She was aware that in real time only a few minutes had passed, though from her phased perspective, it had been about 20. Fran pulled out a phase at a bit of a distance to avoid startling the non-visitors and started signing her report to David. Sai, Lucent's Sanctuary, Punjar. Sai crouched behind a bush near the outer wall. He had finally found a spot that was only patrolled every 10 minutes or so. Forcing himself to breathe evenly, he shoved down his panic. He needed to get out of the sanctuary ground soon, or he'd be too weak to make it over the wall. All he'd eaten since the takeover was water and a package of crackers he had found in last Abvol's office. After a day of no real food, his stomach was burning. He listened carefully in case the patrol had shifted its schedule, but there was only the sound of the birds. Sai got to his feet and started running towards the wall, feet pounding, arms pumping. He jumped as high as he could when he reached the wall and managed to get his hands hooked on top. His feet scrambled against the stones and propelled him up and over. The drop on the other side was more than he expected, and he twisted his ankle when he landed, tumbling onto his hands and knees. He stayed on all fours, tears of rage and pain dripping down. He couldn't help his fellow Lucents. He hadn't even been able to feed himself, and now he was injured. He pulled out his comm. No signal. He wanted to scream. Looking up, he saw the green bushes and trees of the park that surrounded the sanctuary. Sai got to his feet and limped over to take cover in the greenery. Once he was out of sight, he pulled out his comm. Still no signal. Sai took a few deep breaths and then tried his comm again. Nothing. He looked down at his clothing, which he had smeared with mud to avoid being a white beacon on the grounds. He was filthy. He gritted his teeth and limped down the parkway. There was no one in sight. All the benches were empty, and there were none of the usual picnickers or locals out for a stroll. The skin on the back of his neck prickled. Cy shifted his path to keep more trees and bushes between himself and the wall of the headquarters. He was getting tired. His goal was a newsstand just ahead. When he reached the small kiosk, a foul smell alerted him before he saw the legs of the proprietor sticking out from behind the counter. Cy felt rage build within him. He tried his calm again. His call went through, and Cy sobbed once when Ose picked up. "Cy, where are you?" "At the newsstand by the library." "Stay there. Stay low." "Ose, stay there." "I'm on my way." "Stay on the line." "They have the headmaster and all the rest of the lucents, some species with curved tusks, short, muscular, tan skin, not much hair." Cy felt his legs start to weaken and he sat down on the grass. "The Cura, yes, we know who they are. Why are they doing this?" "Apparently they wanted the headmaster to turn me over to him. When he refused, they insisted." "You? Why you?" Cy felt a wave of dizziness sweep through him and he closed his eyes. His comm unit dropped from his hand. He heard Ose's voice, thin in the distance. He felt himself toppling over, and someone put a cold arm around him and kept him sitting up. Cy opened his eyes and saw the face of a woman floating in and out of focus. He knew her. He searched his mind for her name, but he couldn't keep his thoughts together. She smiled at him, and her hand came into view, closed in a fist with the thumbs up. "Breathe, Cy. Breathe. You're okay. Just focus on your breath." Her voice rasped in his ears. "Try to drink this." A container was held against his lips, and he tried to sip. It was warm, some kind of thin soup. "There we go. Try another sip." Cy tried to speak Ose's name, but his voice failed. "Ose's on his way, just a minute or two, and he'll be here. Are you hurt anywhere? Did you hit your head?" Cy whispered, "No," and then, "Ankle." "Okay then, let's take a look." The woman shifted him slightly so his back was against the newsstand. He wrinkled his nose and tried to move away from the structure. "Yeah, that's not the best smell, is it? Your ankle is pretty swollen. Let's get you away from this spot." As the woman stood up, he saw her black skin suit. She was a visitor. He racked his clouded brain for her name. He knew her. Fran, Doc's Auntie Fran. She was usually a frightening figure. Right now she just seemed kind and capable. She put her arms under his shoulders and legs and lifted him up like he weighed nothing. "Let's walk towards them, shall we?" Cy tried his best to form words. "Stay low." "Oh, no worries. We already took out the Cura. They're in custody, and the sanctuary is safe." There was a shout and the sound of running feet. Ose's face swam into view, and Cy managed a weak smile before everything went black. Ose, the estate, Punjar. Ose sat next to Cy on the front veranda of his childhood home, his hand entwined with his partner's. "Thank you for the invitation to come to your talk show tomorrow, Corius, but I'm not sure we're quite up to it," said Ose. He did his best to smile gracefully at the reporter, standing on the other side of the table, his eyes unblinking. "Ah, but you'll miss seeing my special guests," replied Corius. "Ambassador Smith and her daughter, Duck, have agreed to appear." He paused. "Apparently, they have an announcement to make." Ose felt a twinge at the thought of seeing the visitors in person. Maybe they should go. His mind twisted, excitement mixed with curiosity, as he stared at the table that held the remains of their lunch. An imaginary Fran was standing by the table, mostly solid, with a hint of blue. Ose's hands twitched as he tried not to repeat the movements she was making. Ose saw the pale pink recording on light in Corius's eye. That meant he was filming. Because they were here at the estate, the feed was not going out live, but Ose was sure that Corius wouldn't hesitate to use the footage on his talk show if it was juicy enough. Cy spoke up. "Corius, your guests are infinitely fascinating, but I'm still a bit weary. Perhaps another time." Corius gave a mock frown. "Well, if you won't make it to my show, maybe you can tell me a bit about your ordeal. I understand that you're hesitant to explain all the details, but surely you can eliminate at least a little bit of the story." The Lucent sanctuary invaded, people killed, innocent blood spilled. There must be more to this than random tragedy. Ose forced his eyes from Fran. Corius, this is my home. I know that you're a dear friend of the family, but we really would strongly prefer to rest for now. Neither of us is willing or able to assist you in your quest for a story. But you'll come to the show? I know Ambassador Duck would love to see you there, replied Corius. Ose looked over at Sai, who took a deep breath. Perhaps we will check with our opal and go from there, said Sai. The sound of tinkling chimes came from behind the seated men. A smile grew on Corius's face, and he bowed. Gentlemen, I am sure you remember my lovely wife, Hyris. A woman came into view, and both Ose and Sai stood up to bow instinctively. Ose felt himself come to center again. There was still beauty. There was still sanity and civilization and a purpose in life. One of the wisest, most beautiful beings in the universe was a Punj woman. As long as they existed, any issue could be mastered. Any problem could be solved. Hyris wore a shimmering dress folded in intricate pleats around her body. Every centimeter of the dress was rich with detailed beadwork of pale pink and yellow. Her hands were covered with a thin mesh that dripped with jewels, and a geometric headdress rose from her elegant head. She was elderly and moved with a slow, relentless grace. Tiny chimes hung from her forearms, and her face glowed with the pale pink and yellow pattern that was the inspiration for the beading on her dress. Hyris nodded her head in acknowledgement of their bows. Gentlemen, she turned to Sai. I am so pleased to hear that there is no lasting damage to you, Lucent Sai. How difficult your trials must have been. Sai bowed even lower. Ose murmured reassurances. They watched as Corius fussed over his wife, finding her an extra cushion and seating her in the diffused shade under an umbrella. Once she was settled, they sat back down. Ose shifted his gaze back to Fran. She was still signing. Thank you for your concern, said Sai. I am recovering quickly, and if I can manage to avoid your husband's questions for just a while longer, I might actually come out of this unscathed. Corius, are you pestering them? Hyris raised an eyebrow. It's my job, my love, and the events are still a bit of a mystery, said Corius. Hyris shook her head gently. Indeed, but these men have much more on their minds than the tragedy at hand. Look at them. They are bereft at the loss of life, yes, but there is still worry in their eyes. Their brows are lined. They grip each other's hands tightly. For them, this is not over, and thus, telling you their story now may result in further damage. Corius looked at Ose and Sai with concern. Is that true? Is there still danger? Ose held his features still. I promise, when this is all over, I will tell you the whole story, or at least as much as I am able. But for now, we must focus on getting Sai completely recovered. He watched as Fran dissolved into nothing. Something deep inside him relaxed. Corius nodded and sat in the shade next to his wife. I apologize. I did not realize. How can I help? Perhaps you can point my assistant, Mobe, in the right direction, asked Ose. We are searching for information about the Cura, their base of operations, their economic resources, their culture. We are especially looking for property they may rent or own, on or off their home planet. Corius frowned. The Cura? They are mercenaries mostly, with a home world near the galactic core. I can't remember the name of the planet at the moment, but they are born and raised on it. Once they reach adulthood, they are assigned a unit and then shipped off to fight. Most Cura never see their home planet again once they get into the ranks. I'll see what else I can dig up. He tilted his head. Mobe, you say? Where is he now? He's over with the houndsmen. There is a new litter of puppies. Wonderful. Corius stood and offered his hand to his wife. Darling, would you like to stroll and see the new hounds? Yes. Hyris took her husband's hand and rose gracefully. Perhaps one of them will choose me, and I'll finally have a hound of my own. Oh dear, I hope not, Corius frowned. They are such fierce creatures, my love. Hyris smiled, her face a mixture of calm delight. Exactly. Chapter 18. Basset, Hutlum, Kesu. A cheer rose up from the crowd as Busset stepped into the spotlight. She was dressed in a glittering golden sheath with a matching mask that covered most of her face. With a flourish of her hands and a swerve of her hips, Busset pulled out a small square of cloth from her sleeve. She threw it into the air, spun around, and the cloth vanished. The audience clapped and called for more. Busset breathed in their approval. Focus, she told herself, and shifted quickly to more advanced sleight-of-hand tricks. By the end of her 20-minute set, she was sweating with effort, and her hands ached, but the crowd was happy. Busset was grateful. The set of skills she had perfected as a pickpocket decades ago had easily been repurposed as a magic show. The mystical endeavors of Enterlus. It was just a cricked act in a small variety show, in a dive bar on a temple planet, but it was steady pay. It had been 2 weeks since she had escaped the temple. The news had broken last week that the prophecy had been fulfilled, which meant that Yulish had stepped up and Buck had rigged something. Busset was relieved. Served her sister right for ignoring her calls. Busset took her final bow, then lifted her head slightly to scan the audience. Sometimes there was a fan who wanted to have dinner, sometimes a fan who wanted more. She didn't mind the extra attention, but it kept her interactions to public spaces and her mask firmly in place. There was no point in starting something she couldn't finish, with her still tender hands and well-known face. Her eyes skimmed over a middle-aged last, then snapped back. Kester. That prissy fool was sitting back row middle, his robe stretched over his belly. He was looking right at her, clapping politely. She froze, then turned quickly and left the stage, heart pounding. Maybe he hadn't recognized her, maybe he had, but didn't care now that the prophecy was fulfilled. She picked up her pay and exited the club through the back door, pulling on her old gray and red robe over her costume. Busset walked down the middle of the alley, heading around to the front of the theater while keeping an eye on the shadows. She was not exactly prey anymore, but still a bit of a tempting morsel, with the flash of her costume showing every few steps under her robe. She had found it in the trash bin behind one of the mansions on the east side of town. The sparkly dress needed just a bit of adjustment, and suddenly Busset had a costume meant to show, and she had lined up her magic gig in less than a day. All of her hard work would go to waste, though, if Kester made a fuss about her. She paused at the entrance to the alley, then peered around the corner. No Kester in sight, just a normal street with the usual late-night crowd. Taking a deep breath, she pulled the hood of her robe over her head, moving quickly down the sidewalk, blending in as much as she could. She went past the noodle shop and checked how hungry she was. 1 meal a day was her usual rule, but she was starving. It had been a high-energy show, and the nerves afterwards hadn't helped. She ducked through the front door of the noodle shop and bought a bowl of noodles to go. She considered treating herself to a synth patty too, but decided against it. Every credit was precious. She headed to the rundown building where she had rented a room. This would be her 4th night in a row sleeping indoors. It felt nice. Her place was just as she'd left it, the small thread clinging to the door handle still in place. Busset pulled off her robe and gown and put on a cheap tunic she'd found in the dresser her first day there. She considered whether it was worth a trip to wash up in the shared bathroom at the end of the hall. She decided against it for now. She wasn't shy by any means, but the rusted pipes and moldy tiles of the shower left her feeling dirtier than before she washed. She sat at the rickety table by the curtained window and popped the top off the bowl of noodles. She tried to make herself eat slowly, but the noodles were hot and chewy, and the sauce was spicy. The food was gone in a minute. Her stomach churned comfortably, and Busset sighed in contentment. With tomorrow's pay, she'd have enough saved to buy the next item needed for her plan, a used stun gun from the reuse shop. Busset knew that it had been foolish of her to expect Yulish to help her when she was back in the temple, being slowly poked to death. But Buck was another story. He had promised riches and retirement, not torture. His lack of response still awoke a fury in her. He needed to pay for putting her into the situation, and then for abandoning her when she asked, no, begged for help. Someday she was going to be walking down the street and she'd see him. He couldn't stay in the temple forever, and when he came out, she'd be waiting. Kester, Hutlam, Kesu, Kester stood in the theater lobby, watching as the last of the audience wandered out the front doors. The staff ignored him, used to his visits. They knew that if he wanted info, he'd seek them out somewhere less public. The theater manager came into the lobby and paused as he noticed Kester. "Peyote," said Kester with a broad smile. "Let's talk." The man spun around on his heel and went back outside. Kester followed. Midway down the block, Peyote darted down an alley. Kester turned in the same alley and spotted the manager crouching behind a trash bin. "Come now, my good man, there's no need to make a fuss," said Kester, pulling him to his feet. "I don't have any information for you," said Peyote. His voice shook. "Oh, come on, surely you've seen her by now. She's not easy to miss." Kester pulled up Bussett's picture on his comm unit. "Here's a refresher. Keep in mind she's a visitor, but she can't phase. You have nothing to worry about. She can't hurt you." He felt his voice curl into scorn, and bile rose in his throat. He hated this man. He hated all his informants. They were worms writhing through the core of the city. Breathing slowly, he allowed himself to rage for a moment and then let his anger go. There was no point in fuming. This man had not seen Bussett. The true first had revealed herself finally, and the source was renewed. Kester felt himself flushed at the thought of Yulish. She had been found on top of the source with that idiot Selrus. No matter. Kester would win in the end. He always did. Glory rolled through him from his toes to the tip of his head, bathing him in exultation. If Yulish was the first, then he was meant to be the consort, at least the one that made the history books. It was just a matter of time. A twinge tapped at the back of his mind. The darkened room with the scraps of paper and words from the distant past swam briefly before his eyes. Discipline, faith, commitment, sacrifice. He squared his shoulders, his mind skipping around the word sacrifice as he imagined the circle gathering close as he seated himself in the head-last chair. "Sir?" Peyote's eyes were wide as he stared up at Kester. Kester breathed in deeply and then smiled, patting Peyote on the shoulder. "I understand. Well, if you learn anything, please let me know. There's quite a reward for her, and you know the penalty for not reporting a person of interest to the service." Peyote squirmed away from Kester's touch and dashed out of the alley. Kester sighed. The man was so skittish. He had probably heard about what happened to his predecessor, caught harboring visitors back when they had been hunted. Those had been chaotic days. Kester wandered out of the alley, letting his feet find their own way. It was a beautiful evening, and the street was full of tourists, darting in and out of the myriad bars and restaurants that filled this part of town. He considered stopping for a drink, but decided against it. His stomach was calm, and he didn't want to chance it. His mind drifted back to when the first had been discovered. Ose had been in the circle then, striding around the temple, ordering everyone around when he wasn't out hunting visitors. Kester chuckled to himself. Ose had been so arrogant, thinking of himself as invulnerable. All it took was Selrus finding the first on the steps of the temple to start Ose's downfall. Kester felt his smile turn into a sneer. Selrus was an idiot, thinking that Bussett was the first and publicly backing her. The night air felt good as he walked, heading roughly in the direction of the temple. There was no way he'd make it on foot the whole way, but he might as well pretend. He wasn't very good at pretending, but maybe practice would help. Mobe, Dome 1, Thrid. Mobe sat down on the ground in the back of the tourist cage, wearing his worn offered robe as a disguise. It had been too long since he'd seen Duck. His hearts were pounding, stressed from the trip down on the shuttle. He was sure that the pilot hadn't recognized him, but his tentacles were difficult to hide. He just needed a glimpse of her to make sure she was all right. An elderly Perrette sat down next to him, its fronds stretching straight up to gather whatever light wasn't blocked by the tourists milling about. Mobe nodded politely. The Perrette, its main stalk pitted with scars, nodded back. Its leaves rattled, and the translator in its comm beeped. A pleasant voice asked, "Are you capable of digging? Quickly?" A sigh escaped Moby before he could stop himself. He flipped on his comm's translator. The force field extends into the ground. There is no way to dig yourself out of the torus area. The parrot shook, a breeze rippling out from it. I am aware, but perhaps a body could dig straight down, deep down, to where the Thrid lived. Moby felt his tentacles flutter with interest. The Thrid lived underground? I believe so. The parrot extended a frond. I am Skiel Ilske, professor of ethnology. I have a theory that I need to test. I applied to the visitors for permission to dig, but they have refused my request. Ilske's leaves dropped for a brief moment. My funding was cut based on the visitors' decision. I am sorry for the cut in your funding, murmured Mobe, the wind from the parrot's conversation whirling around him. I am Biome. The ease of lying about his name surprised him. He shook off the feeling. What makes you think the Thrid lived underground? Their bodies evolved here on Thrid, so the toxins in the air and water didn't impact them. They could have easily lived on the surface. Maybe now, but at some point in their history this planet was deadly to them, said Ilske. They evolved underground and only moved freely on the surface the last 600 cycles or so. It pulled out a hollow emit and triggered an image. A cell with a massive Thriddian inside floated in the air. This is Hrun, the last living Thriddian, executed 3 cycles ago for its part in the visitor's abduction into our time. It spent the last few months of its life reciting the history of its people, perhaps to make sure their history lived on, even if their race died out. Moby stared at the oozing gray-green blob on the screen. Thorns were embedded in its flesh, writhing slowly. At the top of the massive body was a lump. Maybe its head? A hole at the front of the lump kept pulsing, opening and closing. The Thriddian language is built out of odors, said Ilske. Difficult to translate, but not impossible. Moby shifted slightly away from the screen. He could almost smell the Thriddian speech. Ilske forwarded the recording. Here's the section I have been studying. It waved a frond. It's talking about an old fable, about the purpose of its people. The story's about a deformed Thriddian infant back when they lived closer to the surface. It had been left on the surface to die, but survived, and spent its life wandering the surface, mapping the planet. It was named Organ, which roughly translates to needle. It seems that Organ went from home cave to home cave, stitching together the Thriddians with stories of the planet. Moby glanced at the parrot next to him. None of this explained the need to dig. He wondered if Ilske was senile. It was Organ who recommended the Thriddians move their homes deeper underground. And listen, Ilske pointed to the screen. It says here that the Thriddians dug to the depth of water and made their new caves there. Ilske flipped off the holo and tapped the dirt. The water level is 12 meters below us. I can dig that in about 4 hours. With your help, we can get it done in 2. Moby blinked. I did not bring a shovel, he said as politely as he could. There's no way to hide the hole, let alone the dirt we dig up. The tourists will notice and give us away. Ilske's branches contracted. It will take them time to dismantle the force field to come after us. They will delay further, not wanting the tourists to get loose. Can't you use your tentacles to dig? We could do it. A slow, sinking feeling crept through Mobe. Was this how he seemed to Master Ose with his constant mention of duck? Unrealistic? Obsessed? He pushed the thought away. Professor Ilske, I am honored that you would allow me to participate in your experiment. However, it may be much more successful if you obtain digging tools. Perhaps a spiral boring device that you could set up in a back corner? You could dig a small, unnoticeable hole and go down as far as you want to check for ruins. Moby let his tentacles relax and folded his hands together. I am happy to contribute a small donation for the purchase of the borer, if you would allow me to do so. Ilske gusted a fragrant wind buffeting Mobe and the tourists nearby. Excellent! It hopped up, its crown of leaves almost brushing the top of the cage. Thank you. I shall consider a mention of you in my memoirs. Mobe watched as Ilske swayed towards the exit, joining the small line of tourists waiting to return to the space station. Satisfaction tingled in his tentacle tips. He was nothing like the Perrette. Ilske had been diverted by a simple suggestion of a better tool. Mobe knew he'd never be so easily distracted from protecting Duck. Thank you for listening to Ose, Book 2 of the Visitor series. Ose was written by Pamela Zero. This podcast was recorded and edited by Pamela Zero. The song Ghost was written, sung, and produced by Pamela Zero. Background music is called Insight, and it's by Megan Wofford. Ose is available in paperback on Amazon. Please be sure to like and subscribe and visit thevisitorseries.com for more info. Thanks, everyone. I'll talk to you soon.